Hello, everybody. Welcome to the fifth episode of Beyond Talking Points. I'm Matthew with my co-host Matt. Today we're not actually gonna, or for this episode, we're actually not gonna dive into too many news stories. We're just gonna ask each other questions and try to get a feel for each other's political philosophies. Did you want to ask a question first, or should I?
Yeah, so I was just going to mention that we both took a quiz on isidewith.com, which is a fun little website where they ask you kind of basic political questions. Sometimes they're specific, sometimes they're not. You can put yes, no, or like a different answer, and you say how much you care about that issue, and then it kind of tells you how much you agree with a lot of candidates and what political parties. So we both did that, and we're using that as a little bit of a guide to delve into our political differences and maybe why we end up on the other side of issues. So I was gonna ask you to lead off with kind of who I side with was telling you that you agreed with most, and maybe if you thought that was fair or why you think that.
So, as I was telling you, not the first time I took it, but the first time I took it for the 2020 presidential ballot, I did it a few weeks ago, and I could just, I guess, read off the top three people that it says I agree with. We can go into more specifics later. So the first time, this is the quiz I took a couple weeks ago. It said I agreed with Bernie Sanders 92% of the time.
Jesus Christ.
I agreed with Tulsi Gabbard 89% of the time, and I also agreed with Beto O'Rourke 89% of the time. And then it said I agree with the Green Party 92% of the time, the Socialist Party 87% of the time, and the Democratic Party 84% of the time. Now, as I said, I also took it. Sorry, go ahead.
I just want to cut in here, and I just want to. This is a valuable moment in episode 5 right here of what our podcast is about. You see, I listen to a ton, and I do not reiterate this enough. I listen to a ton of podcasts. That's all I listen to. That's why we do one, is because I listen to so many. I figured I had to get on that train at some point. And and he just said that he agrees with Bernie like 92% of the time, Tulsi 89%. And I'm sitting over here, and I screenshotted my results of the top people I disagree with. The only person who that he mentioned is on my top 7 is Tulsi, and she's at 15%. So, and then for me, the Green Party was 13, and the Socialist was 9%. So I just thought that was really funny as you're listening to them, because we're having these discussions where we end up agreeing like half the time, and then I'm like, you're 92% Bernie. He's probably like 7% on this list for me. So yeah, I just got a kick out of that. So go ahead, continue.
I was just going to say, excuse me. I also just took it a little bit before we did. Excuse me. Sorry. Before we did the show today. Sorry, it's something in my throat. So I actually disagree with the.
Well, while he's dying over there, I'll fill the dead time. Well, when I first did this quiz, I think this is something similar to what he's going to say. It only gives you a small sampling of questions, and then you can choose to answer more. And in the first sampling of questions, I was disturbed by how much it said I agreed with President Trump. But then once I answered more question, it dropped by about 15% more, and I was like, okay, this is fine. So did you have a similar experience to that?
Yes, well, that's what I was going to say. That the quiz I just took today, it has my top 3 for candidates is Gabbard 95, Beto O'Rourke 94, and Pete Buttigieg 93%. And as for the parties, it said, my computer's being slow. Okay, yeah, for the parties, it's also a bit different. So for the Socialist, 94%, the Peace and Freedom Party, 91%, and the Democratic, 90%. So I actually think the first time I took it, when I did more questions, it was more accurate.
Yeah. Wow, that's a lot of that's heavy on that socialism right there. That leaves a lot. I do want to say, for the record, for mine, So after I answered more questions, I took a screenshot, and my top three candidates were Gary Johnson, 79%, John Kasich, 68%, and then Donald Trump, 64%. And the first Democrat is John Delaney, which I was like, John Delaney? And I'm like, I think I watched his town hall. I don't remember anything he had to say. He's 47%, and then after him, it drops off to 20% for Andrew Yang. So I did not know that John Delaney was apparently pro-decentralization, but I guess he is a Democrat that's pro-decentralization. That's what this is telling me. And then for me, I got for the Libertarian Party was my top at 86%. Republican and Constitution are both 67%, and then for Green Party it drops off to 13. 9% for Socialist and 7% for Democrats. So that's something. I think it's because when I do agree with people on the left, I agree in a more radical way, which is why I agree more with socialists than Democrats. Because where Democrats aren't pro decentralization, there are some socialists who, in certain realms, are really heavy pro decentralization. And when it comes to say like decriminalizing probably all drugs, so I think that's where the difference there comes in. That's why I think this is actually pretty accurate. Now I was shocked that you 90% agree with any candidate, because the most I agree with any candidate is 79%. So I still disagree with Gary Johnson a fifth of the time, which I thought was interesting.
Well, yeah, just but also to I guess to get a bit more context for the Libertarian Party, I got 29%. The Republican, I got 9%.
Okay.
And the Constitution, I got Constitution Party, I got 7%. John Delaney, you mentioned him, I think.
Yeah.
I got 57% with him.
Oh, whoa, we're close on those two. I'm 47, you're 57. That's probably the closest we get on any two candidates. John Delaney, of all people, bringing us together.
Who else did you mention?
Yang is 20, and then Klobuchar is 15.
Yang, I got 85%.
Okay. So do we want to start investigating why we got significantly different results?
I think that would be a great idea. So
when I was spitballing and trying to figure out what we should do for this kind of episode, I was personally thinking that the first place to start is like the question of where do you think, or what do you think the role of government is? Because for some people it's an easy question, some people it's a hard question. An anarchist would say there is no role of government. I'm not going to go that far. But for me, the answer is I pretty much put 4 bullet points: provide common defense, prevent violence, force, and coercion between individuals, limit externalities, and maybe break up monopolies. I put heavy maybe there because I don't know if I'm for that. And I put like 8 qualifiers on what constitutes a monopoly compared to other people. But that's it. That's it. It's just those 4 things for me. And I think that's why we differ. I think you think it's all that and then much, much more.
I suspect that the anarchist critique of government is probably correct. But actually, this kind of ties into something you mentioned earlier, or in the last episode when you said I was defending the status quo. Probably, I probably am defending the status quo because I suspect that if we do want to, if we do want to greatly reduce government, I don't think we can do it right away. I think it would have to be a gradual process, probably. So, if I defend the status quo in that respect, that's probably why. I would be wary of just, one day saying, okay, no more government, because I think that would just lead to chaos.
Okay, but it doesn't seem like you like the end of what I said, though, because you 95% agree with like Bernie Sanders. So it doesn't seem like you're an incrementalist libertarian. I mean, I can respect the whole conservative view of we need to slowly dismantle all these establishments. But, and to some extent, that's what Republicans pretend to do. Republicans pretend to be for slowly taking away the establishment. Then they don't do it at all. But that's what they kind of run on. And you don't seem like you're in favor of that. I'm not really trying to question how much you mean what you said. I'm more saying I don't know if that's necessarily what your real views are, I guess. I'm not trying to ad hominem you. I just don't feel like those jive with other things you said.
No, I don't think you're committing the ad hominem fallacy at all. I think you're just trying to understand, which is exactly what you should be doing. I think as I said, I do think there should be a role of government as long as governments exist. And I am more, if a government is there, I am more willing to allow them to be concerned with things such as healthcare
And promoting the
and
general welfare. Is that kind of like
education and promoting the general welfare than you are.
yeah. So yeah, because when I was sitting around and this was a random idea that came in my mind, I guess I've tried to do this often. I've tried to like kind of make a mindscape of where people disagree with me and why, so I can understand the counter argument and then maybe the issues that people draw with me and then the issues I draw with them, and then so I can truly weigh the argument. And I figured that, and I was reflecting on some of the conversations we have, and it seems like you take a very consequentialist. If something does net promote the general welfare, you tend to be okay with it. Like when we discussed, I think it was specifically Elizabeth Warren's plan to get rid of student loan debt, you were kind of like, well, if it is just taxing the rich to do this, then I don't see why it's the issue, because it seemed like you feel like the increased tax on them is offset by the benefit it does, and on the net, it promotes the general welfare. That was kind of the mental calculation you seem to be doing. So I think that seems to be the way that I'm interpreting your conceptualization of government.
Now, remind me again, does I should know this because I'm huge into philosophy. Consequentialism, that is the moral stance of if an action or if something is good or bad depending on the consequence it or brings about. Is that the general gist of consequentialism?
Yeah, you're focusing on the ends, not the means.
I think. Well, show me the net harm of the end of the means in that respect. I have a hard time.
Well, so
I think this is where we disagree because I don't see taxing the rich more as harming them.
well, you're taking their property, right? It's like a net loss to them because you've taken something and then you're using it to offset something else. So they've lost their wealth, some portion of their wealth. It may seem insignificant to some people, may seem significant to others, in order to satisfy this end. So that's the mean you're giving up. So sorry to interrupt you. I don't know. I wanted to quickly clarify why. I guess I'm more deontological. So I see the means of that is that's property that's not ours, it's theirs, and we have just voted it away from them, even though they're just people with stuff. So we've decided, some majority of the population has decided it's okay to take away someone else's stuff, but it's their stuff. If they want to give it up, they can, but we're coercing it from them unless they opt to volunteer it. And then that's why I have a problem with the means. I don't really care how little or how much it harms them. My problem is consent, right? If they wanted to consent to it, they wouldn't have had to been forced by the government.
Yes, I guess you could say it is a net loss, or it is a loss to the wealthy, but I guess it's a loss that I'm willing to, I'm willing to, or that I think they should be willing to accept.
Yeah, so yeah, this is a lot of what I felt like our disagreement was. So you look at the equation and you look at it simply like maybe this is 0.1% of a very wealthy person's money and 0.1% of their money to offset a cost that is 20% of somebody's net wealth that is middle class. For hundreds and thousands of people, that is a worthy trade-off. I think if you're looking at it from a moral, like a morality perspective, the fact that you're essentially stealing in the sense that you're coercing it with the majority of the vote, you're just using the government to coerce it in a systematic way instead of like actually breaking into a house wearing a ski mask. I just find that means unacceptable because I don't feel like you have the. I don't think government should be in a position where they can leverage their monopoly on force just to fix something that they think should be fixed. Because I think that sets up a lot of very bad things that have happened in the United States in the past.
If you're charging me with immorality, I think I have to defend myself.
No. Feel free. I mean, the reason why the reason why I think this is because of my moral stance. It's because I'm more deontological. I find the means unethical. That's why I don't. That's why I'm a libertarian.
I'm not as comfortable saying that my philosophy is a means, or is that the means don't matter. It's the ends. I think. This actually, I think a discussion of morality might be another interesting episode. But I don't. I need to do more research before I can pinpoint exactly what my ethical views are. So but I'm just for now. I'll say I don't think I'm generally in favor of any means that go to any ends. So I'm not for killing the rich to get their money, because if we start killing the rich and stealing all their money, sure, that will be a net benefit to people who want that money. But I don't think I'm not for that. But that's obviously an extreme example, and I think taxing the rich more is nowhere near like killing them for their money. And I'm not saying you would think that. I think because then we're also. I'm sorry. I feel like I'm struggling right now.
No, it's
I don't
okay.
know if this episode is going to be very good, but anyway, I'll continue on. Then we're also getting into a question of, well, is taxation ever good? I mean, because there are people who say, no, taxation is theft. Therefore, taxation is always theft. We should not have taxes.
See, well, I guess that's why I find myself as a libertarian. It's very important to define the role of government, because I do think taxation, unless it's for very specific things, is essentially 51% of America voting away your money. And you don't necessarily consent to it. So that's why I say specifically there are very few things that are government functions, because beyond that, it's so subjective that if someone doesn't agree with it, they're coerced to pay for it. And then I think you can make an easy argument that it is akin to theft in a way, which is why I don't think it's government role. Now, I do think you touched on a really important point a minute ago, where you kind of said you are fine with things promoting the general welfare on the net as long as the means isn't that bad. There's a point for you where the means is bad enough for you to say that's not okay.
Correct.
I guess the issue with having a broad definition of government, and then it comes down to each issue's subjective analysis of when the means is okay, is you live in a country with hundreds of millions of people, and there may be times where you define it as not okay, and other people will define it as okay. And there have been times in our history where, at the time, like a lot of people were okay with Japanese internment. They weighed the subjective loss. I mean, they looked at the issue and they said a lot of people are going to be interned, but we think a ton of these people are spies. That was just their interpretation. They said, for national security purposes, we believe that we should intern all these people because we think they're spies, and we're okay with it. And now any American would say that was horrible and vile, and pretty much I don't think really any people defend it. I've heard a few actually very strong on national defense conservatives defend it before. And I was like, okay, buddy, you're really pushing this. But most people nowadays would agree that that means is not acceptable, even if we thought that was a valid end. But the thing is, if your form of government is so open that it's everybody's subjective evaluation, and then we pick the majority, then you get in quick territory where like 40% of people can think the means is unethical, but our government does it anyway because 60% do the calculation differently. And I just think that opens it up so broadly that it's scary when it's literally the monopoly on force our society is the government, which I keep reiterating because that's my conceptualization. It's terrifying.
I think, okay, well, I want to be, clear here. So you're not referring. are you kind of getting at that territory of whether morality is objective or subjective? Because I actually don't want to comment at that at the moment. I don't feel I know enough yet, or I've read enough yet to give an account of that.
Well, if you don't want to comment on that, then I guess I wasn't really getting. Well,
I mean, you were saying that the subjective, or that the government's, or that it's subjective. Who, what benefit would be to who?
well,
Or that benefit is subjective, and that if you want a government, or that you are very suspicious of the government intervening on the benefit of this one group over this other group because it's so subjective.
Yeah, what I'm saying is, if you have big government and you open with the idea of the job is to promote the general welfare, as long as we don't use means that are too bad, then defining the means as too bad, like pushing it a little too far, is very hard to define. And then it comes down to people's individual inclinations. I mean,
I think that's always, the means are always hard to define, though, in human life.
So even if even if you don't want to have the debate on, objective morality versus subjective morality, we do know that we live in a world where people think some things are immoral and some people think the same things are moral. Like that's a fact. Like everybody, like some people will think some things are moral, some things. So even if there is an objective morality, not everybody necessarily thinks they believe in said objective morality. Some people, like me, think that taxing the rich people to pay for something, I think that's immoral because I think they're coerced. You don't. This is a disagreement that we have, an honest disagreement we have based on our different perceptions and analysis of the situation. So I'm just saying, now take me out of the equation, put somebody who's further left than me and somebody who's further left than you. Now they might be the one pulling you to the left and saying, well, we should take a completely huge amount from like the profits of one specific company. They want a policy that targets Amazon and they want 90% of their profit because they haven't paid taxes. Then you would probably say, I think you would say, you can't just take 90% of Amazon's wealth, even if you're putting it to a good cause. And then that's before you even talk about the actual, if the policy would work, you would probably say, you can't just single out one business. But somebody might say, screw it, we're singling out a business. These are honest disagreements. I mean, I'm not going to question that person's sanity. It's a hypothetical person. But these are honest disagreements you can have once you set the goal of government as promote the general welfare, as long as you don't do anything too crazy. And that's why that just gives me pause.
I think that it's not just, I think it can be difficult to, I think that's just true of in general, of dealing with human affairs. I don't think even in day-to-day life, it's always easy to know exactly what means are better than others, or exactly when to use certain means and not other means. So I don't think it's not. I don't think it's just the government.
Yeah.
I think that's just a question of. I think if we're going on the question of means, I think that means are just hard. They can be hard to pin down in general.
So that's exactly, totally agree with that, 100%. And then so my issue is you take that, like in everyday life, it's tough to figure out what you should and shouldn't do. Life is hard. You make all kinds of choices, and you're going to do something. You're going to think it's fine, and somebody's going to have a problem with that. And there are disputes like this all the time, where someone says, "You did that to that person. That's not okay, dude." And then you have like a little discussion about all these social protocols and what's ethical and what's not. The issue that I have so much once the government gets involved is the government doing things with tax money. It's inherently coercive in the sense that if you don't pay your taxes, you go to prison. So you're now taking these subjective things that I could see some people agreeing with or disagreeing with them. But if you disagree enough to not want to contribute, well, if you don't contribute, you didn't pay your taxes, you're going to jail. You go to prison for not wanting to support the fact that the government gives money to Planned Parenthood. You can't make a stand on things like that in our country without getting sent to prison. Because it's like taxpayer money goes to it. You can't just say, no, not my taxpayer money, right? And you can't go, I hate that you guys decide to do this, even if I'm not against it. It's just all you have is the 51% of the vote. Once the 51% decides on a program, you have to. And that's why I just find that so just a it's a scary use of power once you take it into that realm. So I'm kind of arguing
Well, but
I'm a
then I think
libertarian because I'm a subjectivist, and
th- th-
coercion is inherent to government.
well, then we're getting into a question of, okay, who does the government serve? Does it serve the majority? Does it serve the minority? Are there examples when it should are there examples when it should serve one or over the other? I'm more of that category. I think sometimes the majority should be served. I think sometimes the minority should be served.
Well, I've stated that I think I just said a throwaway line about this, probably in the first or second episode, about how I'm actually not a big fan of democracy.
Yes,
and
you did say that.
It's because government inherently serves majorities. That's how you get things to pass in the legislature. That's how you get people elected. And I think the best case for libertarianism is like all the close elections in 2018 in the midterms. Like in Florida, it was Gillum versus somebody.
I'm just curious then, I don't mean to interrupt, but so if you're not for democracy, what would your general
I was more getting at that
setup would be?
I wasn't getting at that I think democracy should be replaced. I was more getting at there are clearly issues with democracy. I think the only conclusion I've gotten to that I feel is remotely satisfying is a stronger constitution and a stronger threshold for passing legislation. So people currently complain, and we talked about this, about how Congress already struggles with people not being able to pass anything, and there's all this gridlock. And I would make the gridlock like 10 times worse. I would keep it democracy, but you actually need like a supermajority to pass anything, because the current issue with democracy, this is what I was getting at before you asked me, was that in like Florida, you have somebody win a state office 50.5% to 49.5%. So now this person who won the election by the difference of 1% now gets to institute all their proposed policies, which are generally the opposite of their opponents. That's messed up. That's the issue with democracy. 49.5% of people have now had their opinions and views gone against completely. So I think the issue isn't I think the issue is the majority is sometimes small, and it easily dominates the minority. So I think the only majorities that we should even be acceptable with dominating the minority is when it's so overwhelming that it's almost unanimous. So if 80% of Americans agreed on something, then yeah, we can pass it. Because at least, even though I think we're still coercing 20%, at least the argument is you're coercing 20% of people. And it's not we're coercing 49.5. Right? I think that distinction is huge. Does this not make sense to you? You're making faces like you are very dissatisfied with what I'm saying.
I'm more confused than dissatisfied.
Okay.
So let me try to articulate these confusions as best I can. So, well, first off, could you define? I think I know what you mean by a supermajority. I just want to make sure we have the same definition.
Well, I mean, supermajority, I just mean, I'm not saying a specific number when I say that. I'm saying if I redid democracy, it wouldn't just be you win 50 to 49 or 51-49 and so forth. For anything to be passed in the House, we would come up with some number. If I was actually instituting it, there'd be some number that's such a high threshold that it could only be met if it was overwhelming agreement. So it doesn't have to be like 65% or whatever the current supermajority is to override vetoes, but it would be a very high number, is what I'm saying.
So are you saying that if a policy, say 80% of the American people believed in a policy, would you be in favor of that policy, or would you be, and it would affect the 20% that disagrees, or the 20% would be, as in your words, coerced to support something they don't agree with. So you're okay with that because it's 80-20, or? So
I'm saying I'm significantly more likely to accept that than 51-49. I feel like that's an improvement. I don't think it's more ethical. I just think if you're asking me what's better than our current democratic system, the first thing that jumps to my mind as an issue in the democratic system is the slight majorities, like how a president wins by a few percent, or electorally. I mean, they lose by 3% popularly, but electorally they win. So they only win by a slight amount, but then their whole policy plans are instituted. Well, that's easily rectified by just making it overwhelmingly majority. You have to have an overwhelming majority to do anything. So I'm saying that that's an improvement to democracy. I don't think it removes all the ethical quandaries that I find our system in, but it would be much more satisfying than how it currently is. So I don't think it rectifies it. I'd still feel bad for the 20%, and I'd still stand for the 20%. But I don't. I mean, it's much better than now.
I'm still not certain what you're. So you don't really have a substitute for democracy. You just don't really like it, but you accept that it's here and you don't want to change it, but you don't really like it. I haven't heard you really give a substitute for democracy.
Okay, well, if I was starting my hypothetical world, or so if you want to do the United States, so we don't even have to do hypotheticals, I would essentially hope that we would deregulate all the policies that are currently, I think, coercing people, right? So then you like make it so marijuana is legal for anybody over 18. You make it so people aren't funding all kinds of things that don't fit into the short definition that I made the role of government at the start of this podcast. After that's rolled back, you would have a constitution instead of ours that makes it so you need certain rules in the Congress and Senate. You only need a certain amount of people to get it to the president's desk. You would just make that number significantly higher. And then the odds of us getting back to this point in time where we currently are is infinitesimally small, because there's no way 90% of people are going to institute programs that are like Medicare for all, or like Social Security, or like giant bureaucratic systems that you have to pay into with no alternative. If you start with a small enough government and you put in this huge democratic system like that, where you need an overwhelming majority, you're not going to actually get back to a state of big government. So that's why I see it as a check on democracy. But technically, if people have such a huge problem with something, then they can still do something. So then you can't really do much better than that, in my mind.
But these people, the people in the government, they would be elected in your mind, or in your hypothetical United States, they would be elected by the people. It would just have to be more agreement across the people who are elected to get a law passed.
Yeah, sure, yeah. I haven't the amount of time we spent on this in this conversation is more than I've thought about it in the past going into this conversation. It still sounds like the best alternative to our current system to me. I once again, I think libertarian principles are important because it's hard to escape democracy, which is why I focus on the libertarian principles to hope that more people will vote in a way that keeps these coercive policies from being popular, right? I kind of accept that democracy is the means that we have to have.
So you accept democracy as a necessary evil, then?
Well, at this point, I mean, nobody's come up with anything better, and I don't think I'm educated enough.
But you're not a monarchist or an aristocrat. I mean, you don't believe in an elected aristocracy or an oligarchy or a monarch or anything. You just.
I've heard.
I guess that's what I'm trying to. That's what I'm trying to figure out is if you could. You seem to be so resigned to democracy, but.
Well,
I'm having trouble, I guess, understanding what.
So I'm usually when I attack democracy, I do it in the frame of I'm annoyed at people talking about democracy being sacred. Because there was a while for about a year where you turn on CNN and all people talk about is how democracy is the most sacred thing ever. And I think people are missing the point that democracy is okay. It's what we've accepted is our situation. But to put it up like it is this amazing thing that is, obviously pure and everything that's a benefit of it is obviously good and holy is stupid. So that's why I attack democracy a lot. I'm not saying that there's an easy alternative that's obviously perfect. I'm just saying when people act like democracy is perfect, that's stupid. Because people make bad decisions. People have dumb opinions. People with dumb opinions vote. That's this thing that happens, and that's okay. It is how it is, and we can talk about that. But that means democracy is going to have some issues. Not everything that's well agreed upon by the populace is a good idea. Like Japanese internment was probably not unpopular at the time that happened, but Japanese internment was horrible.
Oh, there are plenty. Most Americans aren't for reparations, and I'm for reparations. So I'm sure there are plenty of issues in which the majority disagree with me.
Yeah, and it's also like the populace is so like I don't know if you've seen polling, but from like the Cato Institute, they'll do polling on I watched this great event they did where they showed their polling results on paid maternity leave, and they asked people they asked them on the phone, are you in favor of paid maternity leave? And the people overwhelmingly majority said yes. And then they were asked a question of, would you be okay with paid maternity leave if it costs the average worker this much money in payroll tax? And they had 3 different numbers because there were 3 different estimates. One was just by the Democrats, one was by a liberal think tank, and one was the Cato Institute's think tank's number. And then the second you inform them of any cost, the number drastically changes, even the lowest cost. So it's like, depending on which figure you point at, 20% of Americans were in favor of it, 40% were in favor of it, 80% of Americans were in favor of it. So it's like, do people really know anything? And these are all criticisms of democracy without necessarily having to have an alternative form at hand. I'm just saying it has flaws. So, yeah. Are you, well, I guess I've defended and attacked democracy a lot. Well, what's your general takeaway on it? Are you happy with it?
My general takeaway with democracy.
Yeah. Like, do you have opinions on it either way?
I think democracy is generally a good thing. I mean, good, bad. I mean, I hate using these so simplistic terms. Like, that's good, that's bad. But I think. I mean, I want the greatest number of people to be able to have a say, because I think the greater number of individuals who have a say means that the greater number of individuals will be able to thrive as best as they can. But of course, obviously, democracy has its issues. Everything does. Socrates was put to death by a democracy. So
yeah, I don't know how I ended up in the position of somewhat defending and attacking democracy in this conversation. I don't know how we ended up on this train of thought.
Well, I mean, to be honest, if I'm this is nobody's fault, but if I'm honest with you, I feel like this conversation's been a bit of a train wreck. I feel like we haven't really gotten very far.
I mean, I think it's been interesting because you've told me your concerns with what I thought, and I found them kind of interesting because you had different concerns with what I thought than I expected. And then, I don't know, I'm somewhat satisfied with your response to my criticisms. To some extent.
And satisfied in what sense?
Well, like I understand why you're accepting of a government with the idea of where, like, you work around promoting the general welfare. Because when I think about that, I pretty much put you in a corner where I said people can subjectively misuse that frame of government. But the only rebuttal, if you're not okay with that, is essentially accepting my framework. And I know you don't want to accept my framework. So you double down, which is smart, because you thought, well, my framework versus dealing with the fact that some people will subjectively misinterpret it, you're accepting that that's okay. And some people will always be stupid, but it's democracy, and a lot of people can vote, so hopefully we won't make those mistakes that often. I guess my disagreement is I could think of about 20 things off the top of my head where I thought people erred. Like a few were popular, like prohibition of alcohol, Japanese internment and tariffs are like popular things that people think are government failures. Because most people are very against tariffs. Most people know that prohibition was an absolute catastrophe. But then, like, there are lesser known things that are somewhat controversial to call failures, which is like most of the New Deal. There's a lot about how the New Deal completely, but what's the word for it? Elongated the Great Depression. Then there's things like Social Security, the Federal Reserve, certain taxes, certain tax exemptions, and all those things that I could see why the populace is for them, but I find that they I find that they aren't what the government should be doing. And that they're really random things sometimes. Like how a married couple can get tax exemptions. They file taxes differently.
Yeah.
Like, I don't see why the government does that. If somebody wants to get married, that's cool. If somebody doesn't want to get married, that's cool. That should not affect their taxes because like that's the government fines you differently based on if you're married or not. So they're inherently supporting marriage. I'm like, why is the government telling people you get a benefit for living your life this way?
Well, yeah, but I mean, well, I don't really have an opinion on that, but I'm skeptical. I mean, who's going to go out and get married just to get tax exempt? I mean, you have to be a pretty narrow-minded person to do that.
I'm not saying they are. I'm just saying you're not giving them a benefit. You're saying that this is what people should be doing. You're saying here you save money because you chose to get married. Why? If somebody gets married, they should know the costs that go with getting married. They should know the benefits from it. But it shouldn't be, the government shouldn't subsidize people who file jointly, you know? But that's never going to that's never, like, if in my lifetime that tax exemption, or like that, the way they do taxes in that form ever gets changed, like, you have the right to like slap me in the face. Nobody's going to change that because the overwhelming majority of people get married. So no politician is going to say people who file jointly should stop getting a benefit of how their taxes are done. Like, it's just not going to happen. So that's part of my conceptualization and my framework there.
How much time do we have left, by the way? I'm just curious.
I think we're like close to 40, a little over 40. We're like 45 minutes in. So we got like
yeah, and I don't mean to be a Debbie Downer or anything. I'm happy to have, talked to you. I'm not saying like, oh, I hate this. I don't mean to say that. I guess maybe I'm somewhat a bit dissatisfied with my own answers, but I don't want you to take away from this that, oh, Matthew, what a jerk.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate that you did grill me on a few things too, because it made me think about some things that I guess aren't necessarily at the center of my political philosophy thinking. And like, trust me, I used to look at this from a very economist way. I actually think that I've met a lot of economists. I think economists are the worst people to talk to about politics, because they are like, they don't care about the principles or values that aren't quantifiable, which is a huge issue.
I prefer political economists to just traditional economists, actually.
Yeah, a lot of times the traditional economists end up sounding very technocratic. So they look at two policies and then they look at a bunch of numbers and they say, and they don't understand that picking which numbers you care about is an ideological decision, which makes them kind of pretend to be objective.
Which is ironic, because I think economics is a pretty political game.
Well, yeah, it surprisingly was very not political for the most part. I mean, I had a couple of teachers who were incredibly political. Like my most political teacher by far. Yeah, I did not like the things he had to say. He was an international trade economics teacher, which is the place where I should agree with an economist who's very pro free trade. But he talked about how the only reason why people could think freedom is a good value is if they were brainwashed by big corporations. And I was like, I raised my hand and I said, wait, are you sure some people can't come to the conclusion that, they have this viewpoint on their own without being brainwashed? And then he
said we believe freedom is good because we've been brainwashed by corporations?
Yeah, because I think his theory is involved something along the lines of freedom benefits, like being unregulated benefits to corporations. So corporations convince you to care that everybody should be allowed to do what they want, so they can do what they want. And I was like, okay, dude. Yeah, he was an interesting guy. He was also from a Middle Eastern country, and he
oh really?
He had weird views on education systems that force students down certain tracks and stuff like that. And I'm like, should probably let people decide what they want to do. But they're very technocratic people. Like they will look at things and identify objective standards, but they ignore like certain abstract principles that policy can have. Like when people talk about healthcare, like certain people would be unable to buy private insurance, and some people care about that. Some people want to be able to pick certain things, and they don't want just a government program that says you can only go here and here. They want to have all these choices, and it's similar for school choice. But an economist is very unlikely to put that in their calculation because it's intangible. You can't really measure the value of that unless you're doing a bunch of, like, I guess, polling maybe. So that stuff's left out like it doesn't matter. So I think I came in with my disdain towards these technocrat academics, and that pushed me a lot away from the left and even the right, and more towards a libertarian framework. So yeah, that's a lot of it. If you want to cut this a little short, I'm fine with it. We covered a lot of ground, and it was a bit it was a lot of thinking on the spot, I will say.
Yeah, I guess that's probably why I'm a bit dissatisfied. I feel like if I'd been a bit more prepared, if I'd known exactly what we were going to talk about, I feel like I'd have better answers. But
yeah,
but maybe
guess,
maybe that's good, because maybe it while we might not have argued as why we might not have had numbers to back up our argument, we have a general gist of what our arguments are.
Yeah, and I really, when I kind of was thinking this through ahead of time, a couple weeks ago actually is when I pitched this to you. So I did this like a while ago. And I was just looking at it now. I did underline like the sticking point that I think I have compared to you. So I guess what I would say to you is if you can find a good way to essentially give a satisfying rebuttal to property rights and economic coercion not really being that big of a deal. Like I see people's money as an extension of their property rights, because property rights isn't just like your home and your estate. It's everything you have, everything you've earned. And in the United States, we've already decided that you don't even have a right to 100% of your income. You get whatever income you get after all the taxes are taken out. And when I think of it that way, as you worked for that income is yours, but then somebody takes a certain percent out of your paycheck, I just have a hard time reconciling these property rights that I find very intrinsic to people, and this like economic coercion happening when people actually wouldn't want to support something, but they have to, or else they go to jail. I just don't have a satisfying answer to that. I can't bring myself to say, if you don't want to pay for Planned Parenthood being funded, or if you don't want to pay into Social Security you won't see, well, then you should go to prison, by making a stand on that. I can't make that argument in good faith, I guess. And I think that's why I turned to libertarian. And that's why all the things we did, where I went into the economic questions and I put, this is what I care about the most, because these are the questions that eat me away. And then that's why it pushed me even away from Trump and people on the right who aren't actually economically aren't economically capitalist as much as they are just slightly towards decentralization. So that's my closing thought. If you have anything else to say before we wrap it up, feel free.
I'll try to consider that my homework. I'll try to think a bit more on my thoughts on property rights. I don't really have anything to add at this moment involving that. But it's certainly a question worth exploring in the future.
Gotcha. Okay, well, that was an episode. I had fun, for the record, even if you are dissatisfied with our work here. But yeah, so you can find me on Twitter at MattKeckBlog. Matthew, where can they find you? As I always ask now.
They can find me on YouTube. Just type in The Anti-Philosopher.
Yep. And we're gonna work on putting. I'm gonna work on putting some other content out into the ether. So if anybody stumbles on my Twitter page, they can hopefully find some, short articles I've written on random issues that struck me during the week. And whenever I feel like writing 500 to 1,000 words on a random thing that bugs me, I'll just go ahead and I throw the link up on Twitter usually. Or you can just see me tweeting things that are in response to people that piss me off. I don't do it often, but sometimes I do. So yeah, with that, Matt and Matthew signing off.